Hi, it's Tash. Welcome to Tash's Library. Today's video is my June wrap-up where I go through the books that I read and talk about what I thought about them. Now, I did have a book that I carried over from May, and that was Harrow the Ninth by Tamsin Muir, which is the second book in the Locked Tomb series. And yes, look, I read 250 pages of this and have decided not to continue. Now, the first book follows Gideon, who's lifeguard to Harrow, who's invited to compete in a series of trials. And the first book was such a unique, engrossing book with necromancy, dark politics, and a murder mystery in a sci-fi setting. I loved the first book. And in the second book, Muir's writing remains superb. So if you like really good writing, then I'd highly recommend that. However, the second book for me was just didn't work. I was not in the least bit interested for the whole 250 pages, and I felt that life's just too short. I have too many books to read, so I decided to focus on those instead. I didn't enjoy the second person narrative in some of the chapters. Now, I did guess who that was, but it still didn't intrigue me enough to really enjoy those chapters. I also feel that it's quite experimental, and I know that's awesome, but it's not why I read. The way it was done experimentally as well meant that it was far more character focused, and I'm a plot reader. So if there's no plot keeping me going, I get a little bit bored. I'm not that interested in characters. So it just wasn't a book for me. And I can see why some people would adore this book. And if you do enjoy sort of experimental styles and you really want to read a very, very unique series, I'd still very much recommend The Locked Tomb. However, let's get to what I did read, because I did complete my June TBR, which is very, very exciting. The first book I read was Dinosaurs, 10 Things You Should Know by Dean R. Lomax, and this was for the bookworm game prompt Prehistoric Things. This is a short book of 10 chapters which covers different aspects of dinosaurs, when and where they lived, what characterizes a dinosaur sizes, what they ate, how they reproduced, possible family herding behaviors, how they died, and the surviving dinosaurs, birds. I found this a very short, easy to read book, which consolidated some of my knowledge and taught me a few new things as well. Very great narrative style, very accessible, very funny in places, and well-organized chapters. There was nothing I really disliked about this book, but if you're looking for a more comprehensive discussion of dinosaurs, then maybe this isn't the book for you. And basically, if you love dinosaurs and you just want a small hit of dinosaur knowledge, this is a wonderful book to read. I then read Kiki's Delivery Service by Aiko Kodono, which was for the prompt A Summer Cover. And Kiki is a witch, and upon her coming of age, she needs to leave town to find a new village in which to ply her trade. So she heads off on her broom and her black cat Gigi, and they settle in a seaside town called Kariko. And she has no skills in potions, but she's an awesome flyer, and so she decides to set up a delivery service. This is so sweet. The characters are incredibly likable. Gigi the cat is the most awesome cat companion. It's such a cozy, easy to read book that's whimsical, heartwarming. It explores themes of friendship and confidence, finding one's own identity and purpose in life. And there was nothing I disliked about this book. In fact, I wish the sequels were translated because I would so continue this series. Very recommended to people just looking for a cozy read. And if you're doing bingo, it was published in the 80s and it does fulfill hard mode, and it's also cozy SFF. The Rise of Endymion by Dan Simmons. This is the fourth and final book in the Hyperion Cantos, and this was for the prompt A Book Published Before 2000. This follows directly from the third book. So I'm not going to give you information about it because it's massive spoilers. But the first book in the Hyperion Cantos follows a group of pilgrims who are on their way to visit the time tombs, which are inhabited by a deadly creature called the Shrike. And they all, as per the Canterbury Tales, take the time on their journey to give the reasons why they are hoping to meet the Shrike. It is just such a vast world, and particularly from the second book on, the world just expands. This is so beautifully written. I love Dan Simmons's writing. He integrates philosophy, religion, and politics incredibly well. He also refers to literary figures and historical figures in our world, and kind of just so masterfully done. Very, very tense politicking, exploring themes of power and control, destiny and free will, ethics, corruption. There's a very wacky play on time as well. And the only thing I kind of didn't love so much was a romance component within it. Now, this is by no means the primary part of the book. So if you're not into romance, it's definitely not a romance book. However, I felt that the story would have done better with a friendship rather than romance. But that's me. I'm cold-hearted that way. So very recommended to lovers of epic quests and intricate world building. And if you're doing bingo, it is book in parts, but not hard mode. It also fulfills down with the system, but once again, not hard mode. But last in the series, definitely hard mode. Down Among the Sticks and Bones by Seanan McGuire. This is the second book in the Wayward Children's series. And this was for the prompt, a cover depicting doors, windows, or portals. In this installment, we learn the backstory of two of the characters introduced in the first book. Now, if you haven't read the series, the first book introduces us to the Home for Wayward Children, which is basically a home that takes in children who have somehow found a portal into a different world. And when they return back, they feel like they no longer belong. And so this is giving them a space to try and get over that trauma. It is wonderful fairy tale-esque storytelling, and Seanan McGuire creates this very grim, creepy world with a very, very intriguing plot, very interesting characters, and still manages to explore deep themes within a novella length. So themes of conformity and social expectations, personal identity, the capacity for evil, and conditional versus unconditional love. I really preferred the second book to the first book. The first book was really good, but the second book just surpassed it, and it was just so incredibly written, and just I could not stop reading it. I wanted more, but however, the novella length I think works well for the story because it kept it really tight. So recommended to lovers of unsettling fairy tales. And if you're doing bingo, this fulfills hard mode for Stranger in a Strange Land. Then for the prompt, alliteration, assonance, or double meaning in the title, I read Andorra, Pett, and the Oort Cloud Cafe by Richard D. This is the first book in a self-published series which follows Andorra and her friend Sai, who move to a mining station that's orbiting Saturn. They open a cafe and become embroiled in a murder mystery. This has a really cool description of a mining station with a very deep underbelly. So it's a very, very interesting science fiction setting. The characters are really endearing, which gives it a real cozy vibe. You've got found family. You've also got a small town vibe with all it entails, including relational politics, enmities, friendships. The mystery is nothing groundbreaking, but it is intriguing and fun, particularly in the second half of the book. The first half of the book is very, very slice of life, the whole process of setting up the cafe, meeting people, and I wasn't loving that bit, but it does definitely improve. So if you're finding it a bit slow at the beginning, I'd push through it a little bit further, and because it does become quite entertaining. What I just liked about this book was the insta friendship. And look, this isn't unique to this book. This is that kind of cozy family, found family sort of vibe. It's the idea that you meet people and all of a sudden you're all best friends. it doesn't vibe with me. It doesn't seem very realistic to me, particularly in an unforgivable space world. But, you know, maybe that's what makes it viable, because it's a world that could easily kill everyone, and therefore you actually need to find friends very quickly. So maybe that's an explanation for it. So Andy and Sai also have zero skills in running a cafe. So it seems a bit weird that they do so, and they're really relying on other people who live there to help them. So it just seems strange. However, Andy is portrayed as a fairly impulsive character, so maybe this is totally just the way she does things. There's a lot of telling in this book, but the thing that really annoyed me the most was the fact that Andy is absolutely obsessed with every man she sees. And this just becomes tiresome. It just really, really does. It's not realistic, and it's just kind of annoying. It's just annoying to me anyway. But it does explore really cool themes of like community and friendship. So I would recommend this to anyone looking for sort of cozy sci-fi. And if you're doing bingo, it definitely fulfills cozy SFF, Stranger in a Strange Land, Hidden Gem, and small press or self-published. And for Hidden Gem, it definitely fulfills hard mode. I then read a non-fiction called Blue Machine, How the Ocean Shapes Our World by Helen Zersky, and this was for the prompt color in the title. So Zersky, who's a physicist and oceanographer, equates the ocean to a machine that interconnects and drives the entire planet. And the book is organized into a few sections. So firstly, she looks at the anatomy of the ocean, which examines things like temperature and salinity and gravity and density, the role of plate tectonics. Then she looks at messengers, which explores how light and sound travel through the ocean. Passengers investigates the atoms, microbes, plants, and plankton that are found in the ocean. And then finally, the voyagers section discusses the humans, fish, and marine animals that travel on or through the oceans. Sort of as an epilogue chapter, she also has a very short section on climate change. But that's definitely not the focus of this book. I really enjoyed the accessible writing style. Zersky has a superb knowledge of the ocean and communicates it very, very clearly in an entertaining way. She integrates how the ocean has shaped human history and culture as well, and manages to mix physics, chemistry, biology, history, sociology, all of those aspects. However, the historical and cultural elements probably diluted the science for me. I didn't enjoy those sections as much, but I think if you enjoy those subjects and you enjoy the human touch to science, then that's really a way of drawing you into the story of the ocean. She has really cool facts in this. So my favorite fact, which is incredibly sad as well, is that there are higher levels of cortisol, the stress hormone, in whale earwax from the height of whaling, and also during the Second World War, which is when bombs were hitting the ocean as well. So incredibly sad, but very cool. I did not know that. I would recommend this for anyone looking for a really good overview book about the ocean. It does get in-depth in some parts. Some bits are quite tricky, but she does explain it in a very good way. But I felt it felt a little bit long at times, and I very much preferred her other book, Storm in a Teacup, which looks at sort of the physics of everyday life. Very, very well-written book, so recommended. Then I read Lud-in-the-Mist by Hope Merlis, and this was for the prompt Random Picture Generator. And this is set in the idyllic town of Lud-in-the-Mist, where all references to or interaction with fairy is forbidden. And you follow Nathaniel Chanticleer, the mayor, who becomes worried for his young son, who starts exhibiting strange behavior. This was very cool. So this was published in the 1920s. And very accessible writing style, a very interesting mix of mystery, political drama, and fairy tale with a touch of comedy and whimsy. It explores a highly conservative society that really fears forbidden fruit, literally and figuratively. There's great character development where Nathaniel really starts as a disinterested father and becomes quite heroic and changes over the book. It explores the themes of the fear of the unknown, existential longing, conservatism, morality, corruption, respectability, and detachment from nature. It's a very masterful portrayal of the characters, and there was nothing I disliked about this book. If you're looking for old school fantasy that is not like Lord of the Rings, then this is highly recommended. This was super cool and a major surprise to me. I loved it. And also, if you're doing bingo, it does fulfill hard mode for parents. I then read a book that was not on my TBR, and that's Murder by Memory by Olivia Waite, which is the first novella in the Dorothy Gentleman series. And this is a cozy mystery science fiction blend where Dorothy Gentleman is a detective on the HMS Fairweather, an interstellar generation ship where passengers keep backups of their memories in the library so that they can be uploaded to new bodies when they age and die. Dorothy one day awakens in an unfamiliar body, does not know what has happened, and finds that a murder has occurred and various memory books have been destroyed. I really enjoyed the older protagonist in this. She was very, very cool. Someone who kind of finds her calling later in life. It also has very enjoyable supporting characters. So, for example, her nephew is very endearing. There were cool tidbits about the ship called Ferry, and good science fiction components. So, for example, memory cocktails. So that was a nice little touch. So the ship AI is great as well. Awesome character. And the book overall examines themes of relationships and mortality. It also explores the concept of death in quite a lot of detail, which is particularly interesting as it's generally impermanent on the ship. And it gives you the sense of how death can be perceived in a very different way depending on its permanence. So overall, very fun read. The only thing that kind of brought it down slightly for me is that the mystery is not overly well developed, which is probably not unsurprising considering it is a short novella and it's also the first book in the series, so there's a bit of setup going on. The novella also is compared to Miss Marple, but it definitely doesn't have the depth of an Agatha Christie story, so just bear that in mind. And I felt like for what it was trying to achieve, it needed to be longer so it could have a bit more complexity. But overall, just a fun, quick mystery sci-fi blend read. They're my favorite sort of genres. And if you're doing fantasy bingo, it fulfills cozy SFF, published in 2025, and LGBTQIA protagonists, but none of them in hard mode. I then read another book not on my TBR, mainly because the Murderbot Diaries TV series started, and then I was super keen to reread the series. So I read All Systems Red by Martha Wells. So that's the first novella in the series, and this is a reread. I've read this a few times now, and it is a favorite series for me. And it follows Murderbot, who's a security construct with organic and robotic components, and his job is to provide security, but he truly dislikes social interactions and has actually hacked his governor module so that he can spend his days watching soap operas and kind of just follow the orders he wants to follow. And he particularly likes his soap opera called Sanctuary Moon, which is hilarious. However, he also finds himself drawn to helping these pesky humans because of course they're useless at looking after themselves and making good decisions. I adore the sarcastic, witty humor in this. There's also very immaculate world building achieved in a very short novella. Martha Wells is so tight with her writing that pretty much every sentence builds the world in some way. It builds up a picture for you, and it's actually masterful in the way she has achieved this. Very, very engaging plots, endearing characters, and ultimately this is cozy food for the soul, at least for me. And I would highly recommend this to any lovers of science fiction that has a bit of humor in it. Then I read an incredibly weird book, The Cabinet by Kim Un-soo, translated by Sean Lynn Halbert. And this was for the prompt and object in the title. Now, this follows Mr. Kong, who's a clerk at a research facility, who becomes responsible for a mysterious Cabinet 13, which houses the files of symptomers. Now, symptomers are people who somehow have special abilities, such as lizard tongues or the ability to lose time or do magic, things like that. And this is incredibly weird. So it's a mashup of Kong's life with the stories from the files. Very, very unique book. I've read nothing like this before. And you have a real philosophical and sociological discussion through the case studies. It follows very, very deep themes, and to some extent, it is actually quite literary in its style. It explores loneliness, identity, nonconformity, the inability to fit into society's norms, search for personal meaning in a sterile world, workplace idiosyncrasies, and the absurdity of life. It is also quite a harsh indictment on bureaucratic systems. It initially feels quite silly. It took me a little while to get used to the book, but then, as I said, it becomes quite deep, and the social commentary really sits with you for a while. So it manages to be funny, yet poignant and tragic all at the same time, in a very, very laconic tone. I would equate this almost like the X-Files, but if you were to watch it from the perspective of a file clerk. That's kind of the vibe you get. It's a very detached telling of stories, though, and I have to say what brought this down for me is the ending. The ending became incredibly disturbing. So if you don't like violence in your books, just trigger warning, because I had to skim a few pages at the end. So just saying. But yes, if you're looking for a weird and very different book, give it a go. But I don't know, it could go either way. I like it or you don't. I then loved the dinosaur book so much that I went and read another book from the same series called Space, 10 Things You Should Know. And this was by Becky Smethurst. And this covered all sorts of things. So the Big Bang, black holes, dark matter, the sort of distances and feasibility of space travel, exoplanets, the possible existence of alien life, etc. Once again, very readable, very interesting facts on astrophysics. Look, this one was probably a little bit more basic than the dinosaur, but then I don't know, maybe because I've read a lot of physics books that it didn't really teach me anything new. But if you're looking for a brief, very accessible overview of current knowledge about astrophysics, awesome little read, but just note that it was written pre-James Webb telescope, so it doesn't have some of the more current knowledge that the telescope has taught us. And then finally, I read The Caves of Steel by Isaac Asimov, and this is the first book in his Robot series. Although technically I had read I, Robot in May, which is recommended to read first. So this is sort of like the second book I'm reading in this series, but technically the first. That made sense. So this is a science fiction mystery story set in a near future where the Earth is overpopulated, people live in huge city complexes, and food shortage is a looming threat. And this has resulted in a sort of very socialist world where access to goods, services, social rank are all based on social credits. So it's a little bit dystopian and disturbing. We follow Detective Elijah Bailey, who's tasked with investigating the murder of a spacer. Now, spacers are descendants of earlier space settlements. And he is partnered with a human-like robot called Daniil Olivor. And this is a world where some people are a little bit wary of robots because they fear that they are going to take their jobs, and so there's a very strong anti-robot sentiment. So that already creates an interesting dynamic between these two characters. I really enjoyed the police procedural aspect of this novel. It was incredibly well executed, which gave the story a sort of noir vibe. It also explores themes such as xenophobia, sustainability, progress or lack of progress, and Ludditism, so social unrest. The story, however, is a little bit dated with regard to gender roles, so just be aware of that. But it wasn't grating to me. Like I just read all these things within the context of when they were written, and I really enjoyed the story and definitely plan to continue the series. This was a very solid 4-star for me. So I'd recommend this to lovers of vintage science fiction and science fiction mystery blends. Then I did read the 3 short stories that I picked for the month. The first one was Two Small Birds by Han Song. And this was a multi-dimensional story spanning millennia involving a library and birds. It was interesting. For this one, I gave it probably a 3-star for ideas and a 3-star for enjoyment. And it kind of gave me This Is How You Lose the Time War vibes. Paranamanco by Jean-Claude Dagnac is an exploration of an animal city, which is an inhabitable world that moves through space. This was a very cool, very creative. I gave it ideas 3 just because the themes it kind of dealt with, and enjoyment was 4. I really enjoyed reading this story. And the final story by Elizabeth Vonneberg had real horror elements. This was kind of extreme body art for entertainment, and this was very, very disturbing. And because I found it so disturbing, this was really like a 2-star for me for enjoyment. But I think the ideas were probably a 3-star. And that was it. That was my June TBR. I'm very happy I got through it and still managed to read another few little fun books. Let me know what your favorite book of the month was. And thank you for watching. And until I see you next time, take care.